My daughter-in-law screamed, "Get out of my house," so I showed her the security footage of her forging my signature. My name is Elias Cade. And 2 weeks ago, my daughter-in-law, the woman I once believed would carry our family's name with pride, stood in the doorway of the house I built with my bare hands, pointed a trembling finger straight at my chest and screamed, "Get out of my house!" Her voice cut through the air like lightning, echoing against the walls that had held decades of memories, love, and sacrifice. Behind her, my own son, my blood, stood still, head bowed, eyes refusing to meet mine. In that moment, I wasn't his father. I was just an inconvenience. They thought they had taken everything. The house, the land, the name. But what they didn't know was that I'd wired the entire property with security cameras, each one silently recording the truth, including the one that caught her, shaking, nervous but determined, forging my signature on the property transfer papers she so proudly waved in my face. That was the night my heart cracked, and sharpened at the same time. Before we go further, I need to be honest with you. When I saw that 99% of you watch these stories but don't subscribe, my heart sank a little. Please take a moment to subscribe. It helps me bring more stories like this to life. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing the places these stories reach. Now, let's begin. My name is Elias Cade, and before everything fell apart, I used to think a man's worth was measured by what he could build with his own 2 hands. For me, that was this house. Every brick, every nail, every quiet creak in the floorboards whispered the years I gave to it. I built it for my wife, Ruth, back when her laughter still lived in every corner. The paint has long faded, but sometimes I swear I can still smell her cinnamon bread baking when the rain hits the roof just right. It's strange, the way ghosts linger in scent more than sight. I remember my son, Luther, at 12. Small for his age, but stubborn. He'd follow me around with a hammer too heavy for his wrists, begging to help. I'd let him hold nails steady, guiding his fingers, pretending the walls were teaching him patience. I told myself I was building more than a home. I was building a legacy. Maybe that's why, all these years later, it hurts so much to see that legacy handed over like something disposable. The day Ruth died, the air turned thin. I stayed in the house because leaving felt like erasing her. People told me to move closer to town, to Luther's place, but I couldn't. The walls still remembered her voice. The garden still held her touch. So I stayed, tending, fixing, talking to her under my breath like a fool who hadn't learned to let go. It's easy to lie to yourself when silence keeps you company. Then Luther met Mira. The first time he brought her over, I noticed the way she looked around, not with curiosity, but with calculation. Her smile was polite, almost rehearsed, yet she held my gaze just a little too long, as if she were memorizing where everything belonged. I told myself I was being paranoid. Ruth used to say I had the kind of heart that trusted first and bled later. She wasn't wrong. At dinner, Mira called me Dad without hesitation. It startled me. No one had said that word in years, but I smiled anyway. She spoke about big plans, renovations, modern touches, maybe optimizing the space. I laughed it off, said this old house had its own rhythm. She tilted her head, eyes glinting. Every rhythm can be remixed, she said. Luther laughed with her. I didn't. Weeks passed. Luther's visits grew shorter. He'd stand on the porch, phone buzzing, eyes flicking to the driveway where Mira waited, engine idling. He'd hug me half-heartedly, smell of expensive cologne and urgency. We'll come by next week, Dad, he'd promise. But the next week always belonged to something else. It's a quiet thing, watching your child drift away. No arguments, no betrayal yet, just distance. Thin and polite. I started leaving lights on, hoping they'd notice from the road. Sometimes I'd bake the old recipes Ruth loved, just in case they dropped by. But the food went cold, untouched, and the lights burned alone until morning. The house began to feel larger, hollower, as if even the walls were waiting for company that never came. One evening, Luther arrived alone. He said Mira was busy with paperwork. He kept his coat on, fingers drumming on his leg. Dad, we've been talking, he began, eyes sliding away. About the house. It's old, needs maintenance, and you shouldn't handle it all yourself. Maybe transfer ownership, temporarily, so we can manage the taxes and bills. His words were practiced, cautious. I stared at him. then at the framed photo of Ruth behind him. Her eyes, forever bright, seemed to watch the conversation. "You want me to sign it over?" I asked. "Just for convenience," he said quickly. "You'll still live here, nothing changes." But everything did change. I didn't sign that night. Instead, I walked the hall after he left, touching the banister he once built with me, tracing the scratches where Ruth's chair used to bump the wall. The moonlight poured through the window, silver and silent, catching the dust like falling snow. I thought about trust, how it's not stolen in one blow, but chipped away, moment by moment, until you're left holding splinters. The next morning, I found an envelope by the door. "From Mira," the note said. Inside were papers, legal words I didn't understand, and a small sticky tab where she'd written, "Sign here." The pen marks from her hand pressed faintly through the page. That was when the first cold doubt crawled in. I placed the papers in a drawer and poured myself coffee that tasted of rust and regret. That night, the wind rattled the shutters, and for the first time, the house didn't feel like mine. It felt borrowed. The warmth had thinned. Even Ruth's memory seemed hesitant to linger. I sat by the window, watching the yard where Luther once played, and whispered to the dark, "Tell me, Ruth, did I build this house for love or for loneliness?" The only answer was the creak of the old floorboards, settling like a sigh. And somewhere inside that silence, I knew something was already slipping away, and I didn't yet have the strength to stop it. The first time Mira called me Dad, her voice carried a warmth that didn't quite reach her eyes. She said it at the dinner table, smiling wide enough for Luther to notice, and he laughed, proud, like she'd already become part of us. I remember the way her hand rested over his, light, possessive, rehearsed. For a moment I wanted to believe it. After all, my son looked happy, and that had become a rare thing since Ruth passed. Maybe I was just lonely enough to welcome any voice that broke the quiet. Maybe that's why I ignored the small twist in my gut when she spoke. She was different from the women Luther had dated before. Polished, composed, the kind who spoke in careful sentences that made ordinary things sound like investments. Every compliment came wrapped in strategy. "This old house has such potential," she'd say, her tone soft, but her eyes calculating every square inch. I used to laugh, thinking she saw beauty where others saw dust. Now I wonder if she only saw value. She started visiting without Luther sometimes, said she liked helping me with small chores while he was at work. I didn't mind at first. She had this way of making you feel useful, needed even. We'd drink tea on the porch, and she'd ask about Ruth, about how I built the house, about the land. Her curiosity felt flattering until it started sounding like an audit. "So the land's under your name too?" she asked once almost casually, just curious. I told her yes, every inch of it. Her smile tightened at the corners, polite but thin. "That's good," she murmured. "Family assets should stay in the family." There was something unsettling about how easily she blended charm with control. She'd rearrange things subtly. The living room cushions, the kitchen jars, even Ruth's old photograph, shifting it a few inches, like she was testing boundaries. "I'm just helping organize," she'd say, and I'd nod, though my chest tightened each time. The house no longer felt like a memory. It was becoming a project under her supervision. One afternoon, I caught her standing by the study door, staring at the locked drawer where I kept important papers. She didn't flinch when I spoke. "Just looking for a pen," she said smoothly, holding one up as proof. I smiled back, but something cold slid between us, an unspoken understanding that I didn't believe her, and she didn't care. Still, she played her role well. When neighbors visited, she'd fuss over me like a devoted daughter. "Elias needs to rest more," she'd say, hand on my shoulder, voice full of practiced affection. People would smile, whisper how lucky I was to have such a caring daughter-in-law. I'd nod and pretend to agree, even as her grip lingered a second too long, like ownership. Luther adored her. He'd beam when she laughed at his jokes, beam harder when she praised him for taking care of his father. I saw how she fed his pride, told him he was the glue holding the family together, the one who'd carry the Cade legacy forward. Every compliment was a leash, and he wore it like a medal. Sometimes I'd try to warn him gently, ask if he was rushing things. He'd chuckle, brush my concern aside. "You're overthinking, Dad. Mira's good for us." Good for us, as if I were part of that equation. Over time, she began suggesting changes, subtle, reasonable on the surface. "Maybe sell the old truck, it's costing too much to maintain." You should let Luther handle your bank errands. It's safer. You really shouldn't strain yourself with those repairs. We'll manage everything. Each suggestion trimmed a piece of my independence, disguised as care. I didn't see it then, but she was pruning me out of my own life. One evening, after they'd left, I sat in Ruth's old chair and stared at the doorway where Mira had stood earlier, sunlight catching her earrings. There was something almost regal about her, confident, untouchable. I could still hear her laughter drifting from the driveway, sweet and hollow. That sound followed me into sleep, echoing through the hall like a warning I couldn't decipher. Then came the day she brought over a surprise. She'd baked a cake. Lemon, Ruth's favorite. Found her recipe in one of your drawers, she said proudly. My hands froze mid-air. That drawer wasn't for sharing. Still, I forced a smile and thanked her. When she wasn't looking, I saw the old folded deed paper tucked beneath the flour on the counter. My chest tightened. She had been digging, not baking. The sweetness in the air suddenly felt poisonous. That night, Luther called. Mira says you've been distant lately. She's worried. His tone was careful, rehearsed, like he'd been coached. I wanted to tell him everything. The searching, the probing, the way she'd quietly claimed Ruth's space. But when I heard his voice soften as he said her name, I couldn't do it. I swallowed the truth like a stone. As weeks passed, Mira's visits turned from polite to possessive. She started referring to the house as our place. When I corrected her gently, she smiled and said, "Oh, you know what I mean, Dad." The word Dad had never sounded so sharp. It wasn't affection anymore. It was a declaration, a reminder that she was rewriting where I stood in my own story. And I let her, because I still believed Luther would see through it, because I couldn't face the idea that love, even through marriage, could turn into a weapon. But the day would come when that word, Dad, would no longer sound like family. It would sound like mockery, and by then, it would be far too late. The morning it happened was ordinary in every way that mattered, which is why I didn't see the trap waiting beneath it. The kettle whistled, the radio murmured low, and the smell of rain drifted through the cracked kitchen window. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when Luther's car pulled up. He rarely came unannounced. That alone should have been a warning. But when he walked in, smiling like a man rehearsing peace, I felt only relief. It had been too long since I'd seen him without Mira's shadow beside him. He hugged me quickly, too quickly, then reached into his coat and handed me an envelope. "Just some bank forms," he said. "Mira filled most of it. You just need to sign so we can handle the utilities and insurance for you." His tone was easy, practiced, the way people sound when they're trying not to sound nervous. I frowned, but he brushed it off. "Nothing serious, Dad. Just signatures." I looked at the papers, long paragraphs of legal print that swam before my eyes. My reading glasses were upstairs, and I didn't want to make him wait. So I signed. 3 times. The pen glided too smoothly. Luther exhaled like a weight had lifted. "Thanks," he said, folding the papers fast. "You'll thank me later." After he left, the silence felt heavier. I remember Ruth's photo on the wall catching the sunlight. Her eyes half in shadow, half in glow. I whispered, "I hope I did the right thing." The house answered with a low groan, like old wood protesting what I'd just done. That night, Mira called. Her voice was sugar over static. "You're such a sweetheart, Dad," she said. "This will make everything simpler." I asked what she meant. She laughed softly, too softly. "Oh, nothing complicated. You'll see soon." Then she hung up. I stood there, staring at the phone, realizing how easily trust becomes currency, traded, spent, and gone. The following week, the mail changed. Bills no longer came addressed to me. Letters bore Luther's name. Even the property tax notice listed a Cade Holdings instead of Elias Cade. I tried calling Luther, but he was always busy. Mira texted instead. "We're just reorganizing things. Don't stress, Dad." Every word felt like a thread tightening around my chest. I started having trouble sleeping. I'd wake up around 3, the hour when the house feels too alive. When every creak sounds like footsteps and every whisper of wind carries guilt. I'd wander the halls, checking the locks, touching the door frames as if they needed reassurance. Sometimes I'd find myself in the study, staring at the drawer where I kept my old will and the deed. I wanted to open it, to make sure everything was still where it belonged, but I couldn't bring myself to. Part of me didn't want confirmation of what I already feared. A few days later, Luther stopped by again, this time with Mira. She moved through the house like a realtor giving a tour, glancing at corners, measuring with her eyes. "It's such a big space," she said. "Once we repaint, it'll feel brand new." I asked quietly. "Repaint?" She smiled wide and hollow. "Just thinking ahead." Luther didn't look at me. He kept fiddling with his phone, avoiding my gaze like a child caught lying. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the words stuck in my throat. So I just nodded. Silence was easier. After they left, I searched the study. The deed was gone. So were a few other papers. My insurance documents, Ruth's death certificate, even the spare key I kept taped under the drawer. My hands shook. I tore through every folder, every shelf, until the room looked looted. The absence of those papers screamed louder than any argument could. That night, I sat in Ruth's chair again, holding her wedding ring on its chain. "They're taking everything," I whispered. "Even the things that aren't theirs." Outside, thunder rolled, slow and distant, like judgment gathering on the horizon. 2 days later, Mira arrived alone. "Luther's tied up at work," she said, stepping inside without asking. She placed a folder on the table. "You forgot to sign one of the forms." I didn't reach for it. "I think I've signed enough," I said. Her smile flickered, only for a second. Then she softened her tone. "I know change is hard, but we're just trying to make things easier for you." She tapped the folder once. "This will secure everything." I didn't move. Her eyes met mine, calm, unblinking, confident. For the first time, I saw the person behind the mask. Not warmth, not kindness, but precision. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her control came from silence. She left the papers on the table and walked out, perfume trailing like smoke after a fire. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, the rain hitting the glass like small warnings. I thought about every choice that had led here, every signature, every smile I mistook for love. The house, once my sanctuary, felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else already. I could almost hear Ruth whispering, "Elias, you built a home, not a fortress." By dawn, I made a promise to myself. No more signatures, no more silence. I took the folder and locked it in the cabinet where I kept the old security drive, the one from years ago when I installed cameras after a burglary scare. I hadn't checked those in ages. Maybe it was time. Maybe the truth had been watching all along. The rain eased, and light crept through the curtains, pale and uncertain. I looked around the room, the photos, the clock, the walls that once echoed laughter, and realized the enemy had never come from outside. It had walked through the front door smiling, carrying cake, and calling me Dad. And that's when I finally understood. I hadn't just signed papers. I had signed my place in their story, and erased myself from my own. It began with a knock that didn't sound like a son's knock. Sharp, hurried, almost impatient. I was sitting by the fireplace, the embers dim and restless, when Luther's silhouette appeared through the glass. Behind him, I saw her, Mira, dressed in black, her hair pinned like she was heading to a meeting, not a confrontation. I should have ignored the door. I should have stayed still and let the house protect me. But habit makes fools of old men, and I opened it. They didn't even pretend this time. No smiles, no greetings. Mira stepped in first, her heels echoing like hammers on the floorboards I'd laid 40 years ago. "We need to talk," she said. Her voice carried that calmness that always precedes destruction. Luther followed, eyes red, jaw clenched. He looked like a man torn in half, yet unwilling to stitch himself back together. "Dad," he began, "we sold the house." The words didn't register at first. They hung in the air, absurd and impossible. "You what?" My voice cracked, low and disbelieving. Mira lifted a folded document from her purse. "You signed it, remember?" she said. Her tone was kind, almost pitying, like she was breaking bad news to a child. "You transferred ownership weeks ago. We finalized the sale today. You'll have time to gather your things." I took the paper from her, hands trembling, and scanned the signature. It was mine, the curve of the E, the sharp tail of the K, every loop identical. But I hadn't signed this. "That's not possible," I whispered. Mira tilted her head. "Maybe you forgot. Age does that." The jab landed where it was meant to. Luther didn't defend me. He stood behind her, shoulders hunched, silent. I turned to him, desperate. "Luther, you know me. You know I wouldn't—" He cut me off. "Dad, please don't make this harder. We're trying to help you move somewhere easier. You're not safe here alone." His words were soft, but they carried the finality of a verdict. The room went cold. I could hear the clock ticking above the mantel, loud as a heartbeat. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. I tried to speak, to protest, but my throat burned. Mira placed a hand on Luther's arm, like she was steadying a puppet. "Let's not argue," she said. "It's already done. Tomorrow the buyers come to inspect." I laughed then, a dry, bitter sound. "You're selling my life like furniture." She met my eyes. "Correction," she said quietly. "Our life. I wanted to throw them out, to scream, to tear the papers apart. But my body betrayed me. The years pressed down, my hands weak, my knees unsteady. Rage doesn't move easily through old bones. I stood there, trembling, feeling every betrayal condense into one unbearable truth. They had planned this together, my son and the woman who called me Dad. Ruth's photograph on the wall watched in silence, as if she couldn't bear to see what her family had become. Mira turned to leave. "We'll send movers in the morning," she said, voice smooth as ice. Luther lingered, eyes glassy. "You'll thank us one day," he muttered. I wanted to reach for him, to shake sense into him, but my hand froze mid-air. They walked out, the sound of the door closing echoing through the house, like the final shovel of dirt on a coffin. For a long time, I didn't move. The fire had gone out, leaving only ash and the faint smell of smoke. I stared at the papers in my hand until the lines blurred. That's when I noticed it. A faint indentation at the bottom corner. My camera timestamp, the small mark from the security system's motion detector. I had forgotten those cameras existed, but they hadn't forgotten me. Every moment, every visitor, every signature captured quietly, patient, waiting. I stood up, my legs heavy but steady. I walked to the study and unlocked the drawer where the drive sat, coated in dust. The hum of the computer filled the silence as I connected the oldest one. The footage flickered. Dates, times, empty rooms. Then I saw it. Mira, at my desk, my papers, my pen. The timestamp matched the day Luther had brought those bank forms. My stomach twisted. She looked calm, focused, signing my name with practiced precision. And Luther, my son, stood beside her, watching. I paused the frame. Her hand mid-stroke, his face turned away. Proof. Undeniable, merciless proof. The next morning came early. I didn't sleep. I brewed coffee as sunlight bled through the windows, painting the house gold one last time. When I heard the car outside, I didn't open the door. I just waited. They knocked, called my name, tried the handle. I let them knock, let them shout, let them hear the silence of the man they thought they'd erased. Eventually, they left, tires crunching over gravel, voices fading into distance. I sat back down by the window, watching dust dance in the light. The house felt alive again, angry perhaps, but on my side. I thought of Ruth, of her quiet strength, her patience. I whispered, "You were right. Love can blind, but betrayal teaches you to see." That night, I backed up the footage. 3 copies. One for the lawyer, one for the police, and one I'd keep here, hidden where they'd never look. Because tomorrow, when they came back, this time with their movers and false smiles, I'd be ready, and I'd make sure they remembered the night they tried to erase me. They came back the next morning like strangers arriving to collect an old debt. The air outside was grey, thick with mist, and the gravel crunched under their tires like brittle bones. Luther didn't look at me when he stepped out. Mira did, calm, deliberate, every move choreographed. Behind them, 2 men I'd never seen before carried clipboards and glanced around the property. "We're just here to assess," one said. Assess. That was the word they used for taking. I stood on the porch, arms folded, heart pounding beneath my flannel shirt. The house loomed behind me like a witness too old to intervene. "You don't have to do this," I told Luther quietly. He winced, just once before Mira's hand brushed his sleeve. "We're past that," she said. "You should start packing your essentials. It's better to leave on good terms." Her tone was sugar over venom. The men moved inside, their boots leaving tracks across Ruth's hand-woven rug. I wanted to tell them to take off their shoes. I wanted to shout, but I didn't. Instead, I watched as they measured walls, opened cupboards, noted cracks, and spoke in clipped business tones about repairs and renovations. My life was becoming a checklist. Luther hovered near the kitchen, pretending to inspect the pipes. I caught his reflection in the window. Pale, nervous, haunted. For a heartbeat, I saw my boy again, the one who used to bring me nails and laugh at his own mistakes. "Why, Luther?" I whispered. He didn't answer. "You think she's saving you?" His jaw tightened. "Dad, please," he said. You're making this harder. I laughed then, low, hollow. You can't make something hard when it's already broken. When the men left, Mira handed me a small envelope. An advance, she said, so you can get settled somewhere comfortable. I didn't take it. You think money replaces blood? Her smile didn't falter. It replaces guilt. She turned, linking her arm through Luther's, and led him to the car. He didn't turn around. Not once. When their engine faded, I stepped back inside. The silence pressed against my chest like a weight. I looked around. The photos, the worn furniture, Ruth's empty chair. Everything felt smaller, as though the house itself had exhaled in defeat. I sat by the window, the one overlooking the maple tree Luther and I had planted when he was 10. It still stood tall, roots deep, unshaken. You're stronger than me, I murmured to it. That night I packed slowly, not because I intended to leave, but because I wanted to remember how everything felt. The smell of sawdust from the shed, the hum of the old fridge, the uneven tick of the living room clock. Memories have weight. They cling to objects. I folded Ruth's blanket, ran my thumb over the frayed edge, and felt her presence like a breath on my neck. They can take the walls, I whispered, but not you. Before dawn, I slipped out to the porch. The world was silver and wet with dew. Across the road, I saw headlights. Their car. Mira stepped out first, clipboard in hand. He's still here, she muttered to someone inside. I didn't hide. I stood straight, the morning wind cold against my face. You'll leave when the paper's clear, she said sharply. Otherwise, we'll have to involve the police. I smiled then, the kind of smile that belongs to a man who's already seen the worst. You might want to call them, I said. I have something they'll want to see. Her brow furrowed. For the first time, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. What are you talking about? I didn't answer. Instead, I turned and walked back inside, closing the door gently. The sound of the latch sliding home was the only victory I had left that day. Hours passed before the officers arrived. They were polite but distant, their tone that mix of pity and procedure. We've received a report about a property dispute, one said. Mira stood behind them, arms crossed, her expression the picture of innocence. I invited them in, calm, deliberate. Before we start, I said, I'd like to show you something. I played the footage, the room filled with the soft hum of the video's audio, faint voices, the scratch of a pen, Mira's quiet murmur as she forged my name. Luther's face flickered on screen, turned half away, but clear enough to betray him. The officers leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. This looks serious, sir. Mira didn't speak, her colour drained, the mask slipping for the first time. You can't prove the date, she stammered. That system's ancient. I clicked the next file. The timestamp glowed bright, matching the day she claimed I'd signed willingly. Luther spoke then, his voice small. Mira? She didn't answer him. The silence between them was the kind that ends marriages. The officers took copies. Formalities followed. Questions, statements, polite nods. When they left, they told her she'd be hearing from the department soon. She walked out without meeting my eyes. Luther stayed behind a moment longer. His lips parted like he wanted to speak, but no words came. Then he left too. That night I sat alone again, but the house felt different. Lighter somehow. Justice hadn't come yet, but the promise of it hummed in the air like electricity before a storm. I wasn't free, not yet, but I was no longer powerless. I looked at Ruth's photo and smiled faintly. They tried to erase me, I said, but I'm still here. Outside the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I didn't close them. Let the night in. Let it carry my anger somewhere useful, because I knew what came next. Revenge wasn't about rage. It was about patience. And patience was something I had more of than anyone else alive. The days after the police visit felt like standing inside the eye of a storm. Everything eerily calm, but the air heavy with what was coming. I didn't leave the house much. Didn't need to. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one on defense. I had truth sealed inside a hard drive, small enough to fit in my palm, but powerful enough to shatter the lies that had buried me. Each night, I'd play the footage again, frame by frame, not out of doubt, but out of obsession, watching Mira's hand move with surgical precision, the pen dragging my name across a page I never saw, watching Luther's face, eyes down, guilt flickering like a faulty light, betrayal recorded in high definition. But knowing the truth and proving it were different things. The lawyer I found, an older man named Clay Mercer, didn't smile much. He reminded me of myself before age dulled the sharp edges. I handed him the flash drive without ceremony. Everything you need is in there, I said. He plugged it in, eyes narrowing as the footage played. When it ended, he looked at me and said, "Mr. Cade, you understand this changes everything." I nodded, though my stomach twisted at the word everything. He leaned back. "Forgery, coercion, false transfer, this isn't just civil, it's criminal. And they're sloppy." That word, sloppy, gave me more comfort than any prayer had in years. Clay moved quickly. He filed motions, contacted the registrar, froze the sale before the buyers could finalize. Every phone call he made sounded like the turning of a lock on a cage I'd been trapped in. He warned me, though, that justice wasn't immediate. "They'll try to twist this," he said. "Pretend you were confused or coerced into accusing them. You'll have to stand firm." I told him firmness was all I had left. Mira, of course, didn't take it quietly. She showed up one afternoon, pounding on the door until the hinges rattled. "You think you can destroy us?" she shouted through the glass. Her voice was raw, the polished calm gone. "That video won't hold up." I opened the door just enough to meet her eyes. "Maybe not," I said. "But your handwriting will." Her face drained of color. Behind her, Luther sat in the car, staring straight ahead, his hands gripping the wheel like a man desperate to disappear. That night, I poured myself a small glass of whiskey, something I hadn't touched since Ruth's funeral. The burn steadied me. I thought of her, how she'd once said that truth had its own way of surviving, even when buried. Maybe she'd been right. Maybe she'd always known this house would test me in ways I couldn't imagine. I looked around at the walls, the shadows, the faint hum of the refrigerator, and felt the strange mix of victory and loneliness that comes when you win battles that cost you everything. A week later, Clay called. "We got the confirmation," he said. "The deed is void. You're the legal owner again." I didn't say anything for a long time. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded foreign. "And them?" he sighed. "They'll be summoned soon. Fraud charges take time, but the evidence is strong." I thanked him, but gratitude felt hollow. There was no triumph in reclaiming what should never have been stolen. Still, I wanted to see their faces when the world shifted. So I waited. Mira was served first, at her office, surrounded by her colleagues. Clay told me she went pale, then furious, accusing everyone of conspiracy. Luther's papers arrived the next day. He didn't answer my calls, but I heard through a neighbor that he'd moved out of their apartment, alone. Maybe he finally saw her for what she was, or maybe shame drove him away before the truth could. I spent the next few days in quiet repair, fixed the fence, repainted Ruth's porch chair. Each small act felt like reclaiming inches of dignity. The world outside moved on, unaware that justice had unfolded inside this old house. I didn't want revenge anymore, not in the way I once did. What I wanted was acknowledgement. I wanted the silence to finally mean peace instead of absence. Then, one evening, a car pulled into the driveway. Luther. He looked older than he should have. Unshaven, eyes heavy. He didn't knock. He just stood there, hands in his pockets. "Dad," he said, his voice breaking. I didn't know she'd go that far. I studied him for a long time. "You knew enough," I said softly. He nodded, tears threatening but never falling. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I thought I was protecting you." I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But scars don't vanish just because apologies arrive late. "Go home, Luther," I said. "Whatever that means for you now." He left without another word. After he was gone, I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, feeling their pulse return. The house felt alive again, not happy, but breathing. I reached the study, opened the drawer where the drives had been, and placed the last copy of the footage inside a small metal box. On its lid, I carved one word with my pocket knife: proof. Then I locked it. Outside, the night settled warm and still. The maple tree swayed gently in the wind, its leaves whispering secrets I couldn't quite catch. I stood there listening until I realized what they sounded like. Ruth's voice, faint but certain, saying, "You did it. You endured." And maybe for the first time since she died, I allowed myself to believe her. The day of reckoning came quiet, without thunder or warning. Morning sunlight cut through the curtains like thin blades, slicing the dust that hung in the air. I sat in Ruth's old chair, the same spot where I'd once told Luther bedtime stories about honesty and work and keeping your word. Now I waited in that same room to show him what breaking all of that looked like. My hands didn't shake anymore. My fear had burned itself out, leaving only something colder. Certainty. When the knock came, I didn't answer right away. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Finally, I opened the door. Luther stood there, thinner, older, his collar wrinkled. Behind him, Mira hovered, eyes hidden behind dark glasses even though the day was overcast. And next to them, Clay Mercer, the lawyer, carrying a briefcase and a quiet sort of authority that made both of them uneasy. "Shall we?" Clay asked. I stepped aside. They entered, the air changing with them. It was the first time in months the house felt crowded again. Mira didn't sit. She paced, pretending control, her perfume cutting through the smell of old wood and dust. Luther stayed near the door, like a man half ready to run. Clay set up the small projector on the coffee table. The soft click of the USB drive sliding into place sounded almost ceremonial. "Before we start," he said, "I want everyone to watch this together. No interruptions." He pressed play. The room filled with the faint hum of the recording. The footage appeared on the far wall. Mira at my desk, shoulders squared, the soft scratch of a pen moving across paper. Her voice, clear and unmistakable, whispered, "He'll never notice." Then Luther's, quiet, hesitant. "Are you sure this will work?" The silence that followed answered for her. Mira froze, eyes wide, mask cracking for the first time. "This is edited," she snapped. Clay didn't even look up. "Digital signature analysis already verified," he said evenly. "The handwriting, the timestamps, the metadata, it's all consistent." He turned toward Luther. "You watched her do it." Luther's face collapsed inward. He sank into the nearest chair, hands covering his mouth. "I didn't stop her," he muttered. "I thought she was just fixing things." His voice broke. "I was wrong." Mira's jaw tightened, rage rising where charm used to live. "You pathetic coward," she hissed. "You let me take the fall!" Clay raised a hand. "Enough!" His voice carried weight. "You both conspired. The authorities already have copies. Today's just closure." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "Closure," I repeated softly. Funny word for something that never really closes. I turned to Luther. "I gave you everything. Every bit of me went into this house, this life. And you sold it like a used car." He couldn't meet my eyes. Tears slipped through his fingers. Mira snapped her bag shut. "You'll regret this," she said, voice trembling with fury. "I'll drag your name through every court." Clay smiled thinly. "You already did, Mrs. Cade. That's why we're here." She looked around, realizing there was nowhere left to stand, nowhere her words could still hold power. Then she stormed out, her footsteps echoing down the hallway until the front door slammed like a final verdict. For a long moment, the only sound was Luther's quiet sobbing. Clay began packing up, leaving the documents neatly stacked on the table. My name, clean and unchallenged, printed in bold. "You're free of them," he said, touching my shoulder. "The house is yours again, legally and irrevocably." Then he left too, his car tires crunching down the drive, until the sound faded into the distance. Luther stayed behind. The silence between us was unbearable. Finally, he spoke. "Dad, I don't know how to fix this. I studied him, my son, my failure, my reflection." "You can't," I said. "Some things don't need fixing. They need remembering." He nodded, eyes wet, and rose to leave. At the doorway, he turned back once. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "Then don't ask for it," I said. When he was gone, I looked around the living room. The same walls that had witnessed laughter, arguments, birthdays, and now justice. The late afternoon light spilled across the floor, touching the edges of the documents Clay had left behind. It felt like the house was breathing again, alive, cleansed. I walked over to the projector, still warm, and turned it off. The screen faded to black, and in that reflection I saw myself, not the broken man they'd tried to erase, but someone tempered by loss, sharpened by truth. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The quiet didn't hurt anymore. In the corner, Ruth's photograph caught the dying sunlight. For a second, it seemed like she was smiling, not out of triumph, but out of recognition. I whispered, "It's over, Ruth. They can't take it from us again." Outside, the maple tree swayed gently, its branches bending but unbroken. I watched it until the sky darkened and the first stars began to appear, small, distant, and eternal. And in that silence, I understood. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause. It sits quietly in the living room of the life you fought to reclaim, reminding you that survival itself is victory. The morning after the hearing, I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, wrapped in that grey light between night and day, when even the air feels unsure of what comes next. I walked barefoot through the hall, my footsteps soft on the wood I'd laid decades ago. Each creak sounded familiar again, no longer accusing. The ghosts of betrayal had quieted, only the living remained, and that finally was enough. The first thing I did was open every window. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and dawn. For months, this house had felt like a tomb, locked, stale, suffocating. Now it breathed with me. Sunlight spilled across the floor, catching the dust in mid-air like gold suspended in glass. I stood in that light and let it warm my face. It didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like survival. The legal work was done. Clay called the previous night to confirm it. "It's final, Elias," he said. "The charges will hold, the deeds back in your name. You can rest." But rest isn't something you slip into easily after months of war. My mind still replayed every argument, every silence, every look Luther gave me before turning away. You don't just lose a son and gain him back because a paper says you're right. Justice fixes what's written, not what's broken. By mid-morning, I found myself in the backyard, trimming the overgrown hedges Ruth once tended. My hands were slower now, but the rhythm returned naturally. Each snip of the shears felt like reclaiming time itself. When I looked up, the maple tree stood tall against the pale sky, its leaves trembling in the breeze. I remembered planting it with Luther when he was 10. He'd insisted on watering it every day, worried it wouldn't survive the first storm. I smiled at the thought. Funny how the tree outlasted all of us. Around noon, there was a knock. Not sharp, not angry, hesitant. I opened the door and found Luther standing there. No mirror this time. No arrogance. Just my son, stripped of everything but regret. His eyes were red, and in his hands he held a small box. "It's Mum's bracelet," he said softly. "Mira kept it in her drawer. I thought you should have it back." I took it from him without a word. The silver chain was tarnished but intact. Ruth's initials still glimmered faintly on the clasp. He stood there awkwardly, searching for words. "They might give her a sentence," he said finally. "She's blaming me for everything." I looked at him carefully. "And are you blaming her?" He hesitated. "No, I'm blaming myself." The honesty in his voice broke something in me. I wanted to be angry still, to keep the wound alive so I could remember what they'd done. But anger is a lonely companion. "Sit down," I said quietly. We sat in the living room, the same one where our family had once gathered every Christmas. The silence wasn't hostile this time. It was full, weighted, alive. Luther leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I don't expect forgiveness," he murmured. "I just needed you to know I'm done running." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said. "Because forgiveness isn't something you chase. It's something you stand still long enough to earn." He looked up at me then, really looked. And for the first time since all this began, I saw my boy again. Not the man who betrayed me, but the child who once handed me nails and asked if they hurt the wood when I hammered them in. We talked until the light shifted golden. About Ruth, about the years we wasted, about nothing and everything. When he left, he didn't ask to stay. He just said, "I'll call tomorrow." And this time, I believed him. After he drove away, I walked to the study. The projector still sat there, silent now, its purpose fulfilled. I packed it away in a small box and slid it under the desk. Some truths don't need to be replayed. Then I took Ruth's bracelet and looped it around the base of her photograph frame. The metal caught the sunset and shimmered softly, like a heartbeat revived. Evening fell gently. I brewed tea and carried it to the porch. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the kind of beauty that only shows up after chaos. The world felt smaller, quieter, but in that smallness there was peace. I thought about the word home, how fragile it is, how it can be stolen, rebuilt, redefined. Home isn't walls or deeds or even family. It's what remains when everything else is stripped away, the heartbeat that still echoes in the silence. As the first stars appeared, I whispered to the night, "It's done, Ruth." The wind moved through the maple leaves, soft and approving. Somewhere inside me, the ache eased. Not gone, but gentler. Grief, I realized, doesn't fade. It transforms, becoming the soil where strength grows. I finished my tea, set the cup down, and looked through the open doorway. One last time. The living room glowed warm under the lamplight, calm and whole. This was my house again. Not because the papers said so, but because I'd fought for its soul. I had been broken, banished, forgotten. But tonight, as the world turned quietly around me, I was something else entirely. I was home.